Hello, everyone. Sarah Brown here, Vetrepreneur Franchise Coach. I will be your facilitator along with my colleague, Tammy DeCou. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today in our Step 5 group call. So the big picture, we're going to talk a little bit about where we've been, where we are, where we're going. We're going to review the step definitions. I always like to start every meeting with that, where we've been, where we're going, and what you have to look forward to, because I'm a glass is half full kind of gal. We have a lot to look forward to here. We're going to talk about where the various Academy folks are in the process. Almost everybody is at step 5 or beyond. So most of you are overachievers. That's great. For a few folks that are at step 4, I know that you have your step 4 call and are working things out, and you are on track as well. And then we'll talk about what to expect and get out of the franchisor calls. We'll delve into a little bit of what does unit economics mean and what to expect. Then we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll do a breakout session where you will go with Tammy or with me, and you can ask some specific questions. So let's get into it. So I love this mountain view. We are at step 5. So we are at, I would argue, halfway up. We're like at the first overnight stay if we're hiking Mount Everest. We're at the base camp, if you will. So we've had the info session. We have had the kickoff. You have met with your coach and done a deep dive into what makes sense for you in the discovery call. And then if you have had the presentation of options meeting, you have talked about the specific franchise and tried to narrow down the list to your top 2 or 3. So we are at step 5 for the collective group. What you have to look forward to is our next group call a week from today will be about funding. So we will have a guest speaker, a CPA that focuses and specializes in franchising, talk about funding, talk a little bit about entity types, hit a little bit on tax strategy and some things that he talks through with clients. Step 7, the next group call will be the FDD review. A few of you are already there, so bravo. If you are a little bit ahead of schedule, the FDD review is very helpful. Then validation. If you take anything out of our group calls, validation is the most important step. If we had a quiz, that would be the only question. What is the most important step? Remember, to graduate from the academy, you have to go to 4 out of the 5 group sessions and at least reach step 8, which is validation. And if you're there, you have enough information to make an educated go, no go decision. Then discovery day, and then the franchise award. Next, here is the leaderboard. So if you're at step 5, which a majority of you are on track. You meaning that an introduction has been made to 2 or 3 franchises, and you probably already scheduled or had a few of the franchisor calls. Roxanne, you and I are meeting again next week. You're at funding, and Billy, you are at validation. So you get to pick the music for the kickoff to the next meeting. So whoever is the furthest along gets to pick the lead-in music. So go, Billy. That is spectacular. Okay.
Thank you.
So fantastic, everybody. So the franchisor call. The franchisor call, typically if you went through their entire process, let's say that you're talking to Home Smiles, the franchise. It's not just one call. We mean a series of calls. Typically, you speak to the franchisor at least 3 times. It's more like 5 to 6, maybe even more. The purpose and tone of the call. This is not a job interview, but it is a professional meeting. It's a mutual decision process. You're picking them and they're picking you. So, you want to be professional. You want to be on time. If you can't make a call, life happens. It happens to all of us. Just try to be upfront and give as much notice as humanly possible. And, the franchise development person is typically going to be meeting with you. And there's a couple flavors of the franchise development person. It may be an employee of the franchisor, that is common. The other half may be a franchise development group that is working with and representing the franchise system. Both are fine, but if you see like a different name on some of the emails, that's probably what that means, like a franchise fast lanes or a fran growth. And, in the first couple calls, you're going to get a pretty good feel for how good this match is. And so is the franchisor. They know the franchise profile of the successful franchisees and their system, and they'll get a good sense of the match. Okay, Tammy, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. So on your Vetrepreneur website portal, most of you are going to see step 5 because you're in step 5. The steps open on the portal for you to see that step and the information that accompanies that step as we toggle you to that step. So just a reminder, don't be concerned if you can't see step 7 or 8. We try to do it together and align the steps that you can see with the steps that you're actually working in. So if you are at step 5, you'll be able to open step 5 and you'll see a lot of example questions that you can ask the franchise development team member or the ZOR or whoever is working with you. That doesn't mean that you cannot build out some of your own questions that may be more applicable. I would encourage each of you at this point of the franchisor call to really think about the business, because different questions for different types of businesses, right? And you don't really want to miss anything. And you want to be asking appropriate questions for that business model. So there is a bit of homework in this step for you to stay tuned in and for you to really ask the kinds of questions you really need to get the right answers that you really want. I think that's at this point. You can see there's a few bullets that you can ask them about. Definitely culture and vision, what their strategy is for their brand. Some of you will notice that you may have a marketing fee as well as an advertising fee. Sometimes that marketing fee goes to brand strategy. So it's your opportunity to really get inside their core culture, find out how they tick, what are the costs, what financing options, with we are get to financing. Build out. Will there be a brick and mortar? Will there be a small office space? Is it home based? You have that might fit your lifestyle. That would be something that, training mark. Don't take a face value. We go to the steps. So very you
Tammy, I think you're
Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I think you were breaking up a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now?
It seems a little better.
Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Nope, it's back to the thing. So, apologies. Do you mind if I take over until maybe we figure out the Okay. Tammy, if you don't mind, maybe I'll take it over until your internet is a little more stable or something. Okay. So I'll try to pick it up where you left off. So the exit strategy, I think you were touching on this. So, the exit strategy typically is reviewed when you're reviewing the franchise disclosure document. So that's where you really get to figure out what will happen on the exit. And there are really only three things. It is you either renew at the end of the term, you transfer, which is franchise speak for selling it to me. But what does that look like? Are there fees involved with that? And then what happens if, God forbid, I'm hit by a bus, and can they take it over while my estate plan kicks into place? What if I have to close for whatever reason without selling it before the end of the term? Is there a fee associated with that? All of that should be very clear to you as part of your due diligence. Okay. Was there any? Okay, territory mapping. So this is a good one. You may love a franchise and then find out that the territory is not ideal. When we do territory checks, typically they will happen. It will be, hey, is your exact zip code available? If not, is there a viable territory nearby? It may be within 1 or 2 zip codes over. If you're looking at a retail franchise, so if you're looking at a Graze Craze franchise, which is a low-cost charcuterie franchise, how they would do territory is based on the demographic marketing area. So they would look at like the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. So they would look at, they have a rubric and they would say, okay, in the entire Twin Cities, we think it could support 5. We have them on the east side of town. So we think, we have 3 open. There would be 2 available. Maybe you may look at a map and go, wait a minute, there's only 1 open. What you don't know is maybe someone signed an agreement to open 3 and they've only opened 1 and they have the right to open 2 more. So that goes into it. If you're looking at a service franchise, how territory is typically developed is by zip code. So each different industry will have a different list of criteria. So I'll use senior care because that's what I know. So most senior care franchises will look at territory and do it by, hey, we need a minimum of 250,000 people, 35,000 or 40,000 seniors plus, and we're going to assign it by zip code. There are certain one-off franchises that may do it by marketing territory, like a real estate franchise may do it that way, but it'll be very clear to you during the process what the territory would look like if there are available territories nearby. Occasionally, people will want to buy more than 1 license for a retail franchise, like maybe they want to open 3. If you want to open more than 1 unit, it's not like you're going to open 3 gyms all at the same time. That's ridiculous. You would have a development schedule. Typically, kind of to use nice round numbers, it would be 1 every year. So they would give you a development schedule and you would open 1 within like 9 to 12 months and then open the second 12 months later, so on and so forth. With multiple territories in a service franchise, kind of a similar thing, meaning they may have local marketing requirements that you may need to spend in each of your territories. So it would be a similar deal, meaning you could open the first territory and then not spend any marketing dollars for the second territory until maybe 9 to 12 months later. If there are discounts offered on multiple units, typically, and I say typically, they're only offered if you buy it up front. Meaning, so they may have 20 or 30% off of, the second territory franchise fee or second unit, but you typically pay that up front. Okay. So let's get into unit economics. A lot of people are like, okay, I don't know what the heck that means. What does unit economics really mean? What that really means is you're trying to figure out how the business runs financially. What are the drivers of the growth? What are the revenue streams? For a lot of businesses and franchises, They have multiple verticals or revenue streams. And what I mean by that is that you may have consumer, maybe you have a maintenance business. You may have consumer revenues and then B2B revenues. Maybe you have contracts and ongoing preventative maintenance. Those are different revenue streams, and they probably have different profitability and price tags on them. They'll review that with you. What are the drivers of that growth? And then cost of goods sold. So you have your revenue, and then you have the cost of goods sold. That is direct cost, which is typically labor and any product that goes directly into providing that service or that product. You take the revenue minus the cost of goods sold, and you have the gross income, gross profit. There's no noise in that number. Everyone will run it the same way. But then below the line, below gross profit, you have more indirect expenses. Those are expenses that are not involved in the running of the business or providing the exact service. So if you're doing an insulation franchise, the cost of goods would be the labor, and then the product, the blown insulation or whatever you're using. Below the line, you're going to have the indirect cost that will be like insurance, any ongoing like licensing fees. You would have payroll maybe for your office manager. Maybe you're going to pay yourself below the line. Those would all be indirect expenses. Once you subtract that from the gross income or the gross profit number, that's when you're going to get the net income. So do you want to know all of those things? Absolutely, you do. Okay. Someone said there's a window in the middle of the page. I don't know what that means. Okay, I'm going to continue. Okay, so unit economics, evaluating the initial investment. So if you guys have gone to step 4 or beyond, you have already seen the presentation of the options, and that will include the total investment range. Some of you, if you're working with me, are like, Sarah, that is a very wide range. And I say, yes, it is. And so, especially for retail franchises, I looked at one the other day, and the range was 290,000 to 750,000. And that is, that's a wide range. And part of that, what's driving that range, especially in a retail franchise, is that New York City is not Kansas City. If you're going to start up a retail franchise in Manhattan, it's going to be a lot more expensive than it is if you open it up in Topeka, Kansas. But when you get the FDD, you will get a chart in the item 7 that'll show the high end of the range and the low end of the range. So you'll get to see what is driving that initial range. This is just an example here of the type of expenditures that you would see, and the low and the high, and you can kind of figure out with your own budget what is driving that. And then if you're looking at 1 or 2 territories and the discount, you can see what that would look like. But you can use a chart like this and kind of do your own sensitivity analysis to see what do you think you would reasonably spend for the initial investment. Okay. Unit economics. So we talked a little bit about what are the initial revenue streams and what is going to drive this. So this is for a maintenance business. So you want to figure out, if I'm looking at a business and evaluating it, what I want to know is how many customers do I need to make a certain amount of money, and as you're working, with the franchisor, what you're going to figure out is, and as you're doing validation in some cases, what is the ticket item or the check average for the different revenue streams? So if I'm doing residential business in a repair maintenance kind of franchise, I could figure out, okay, what's my average ticket, plug in how many customers, and I'm going to see for that vertical, what is the revenue? And then you do that for all the different revenue streams or verticals and figure out your average monthly. Doing that, and if you have a good handle on the expenses, you're going to figure out pretty quickly how long it may take you to become cash flow positive. And what I mean by that, in the total initial investment, they'll give you a range of working capital. Cash on hand, typically the range is pretty broad. It might be 10,000 to even like 60,000. That is cash to help you get to that number of cash flow positive, meaning how much cash do you need until the business is self-sustaining, meaning your revenues exceed your operating expenses. That's a big number. You should understand that, because you want to have enough cash to cover payroll and other expenses until your revenue grows to a certain amount that you're covering your costs. Okay. And then, if you're doing an SBA loan or you're trying to figure out, what an annual kind of pro forma would look like, either for a loan or for your own knowledge, you're going to figure out and work on a profit and loss statement. A pro forma just means it's a projection. So you're projecting what your revenue, your cost of goods, and then what the below the line is. So this is a good example. So you see the gross sales. This is for a retail food franchise that also does a heavy amount of catering. So you would see, okay, year one, gross sales, and then you go to your cost of goods and food costs, and you have your gross profit. And then you have the below the line, some of the indirect costs. That would include utilities, that would include supplies. If you have a brick and mortar business, that would include rent, the lease, any depreciation or things of that nature on equipment, utilities. You got to keep the lights on. And then you subtract all of those, get your total operating expense. And then you, if you're getting a business loan, you would add in your debt service. And then you get to your net profit. And you should play around with it. I like to do a sensitivity analysis to be like, okay, I've done my validation calls and I know kind of the high end and the low end of the revenue and some of the expense buckets. Maybe I throw in a salary for myself. Maybe I take it out. How does that impact the unit economics and my profitability? And this is a place for you to do that. Okay. So the 4 income streams. There is the net income and owner salary. We talk a little bit about tax write-offs and capital gains upon sale. So the net income or the net revenue, most of your income is going to be revenue on the service or the products that you are selling. There may be some very small amount that comes in from rebates and some other things, but a majority of your income is going to come from the revenue from the product or the service that you're selling. One of the things that you should think about is the owner salary. Are you going to pay yourself a salary? Some do, some do not. Some will make the determination that they're going to pay themselves maybe after the first year when they become cash flow positive. I would argue wait at least 6 months to pay yourself. That is my strong suggestion. And if you don't feel like you can afford that, then I think that is something that you should think about strongly. Are there a lot of advantages in tax write-offs as a small business owner? You bet. There's a ton of benefit in tax write-offs as a small business owner. The franchisor will make this very simple for you. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. They will typically give you a chart of accounts. So you know if you're setting up QuickBooks or any kind of accounting, if you are going to do the books yourself, I would strongly recommend outsourcing that to a CPA or a bookkeeper. But they already know what the chart of accounts will look like. But there's a lot of tax write-offs, and travel and things you're doing as a small business owner. When we get into our funding discussion next week, the CPA will talk a lot about tax strategy as it relates to entity, like flow through tax strategies, like an LLC with an S Corp, I've done that myself, and I found it very beneficial. And then when you sell the business, there are capital gains upon the sale. When you sell or transfer your franchise, typically franchises have a higher, slightly, and sometimes much higher resale multiple than their non-franchise counterparts, because it's not about the cult of Tammy or Sarah. It is about the franchise, that there's going to be ongoing training support after you sell it and you move to Fiji. There's still going to be some support structure, and you can see what the business is doing. Okay. All right. So, Tammy, I'm going to turn it over to you again. Let's see if it's working again now.
Can you hear me, Sarah?
I can.
Nice. All right. So, if you do have access to your Vetrepreneur website, you can click on step 2 to the net worth calculator. It does not save. So it's just a one-time exercise example that you can plug numbers into. So basically, on your net worth, it is going to be cash on hand plus any retirement accounts plus home equity plus other properties that you may have, other assets, maybe another business. And you can add all that together, because those things are assets that help you become eligible for leverage or getting a loan for the cost of your business. And you have to subtract from that any large loans, like the balance of your mortgage is probably the biggest one, any large student loans. And you might not want to worry sometimes about the nickel and dime things like $800 car loan if your income takes care of that readily through your monthly income. But if it's a large car payment, or you've got 2 or 3 car payments, obviously that's going to put a little bit of a dent into your net worth. So you just want to go through that exercise to make sure that you have a couple of things, and that is, one is cash on hand, because cash is always king. However, you don't always want to spend all your cash, because the best thing to do in a business is to use other people's money and let the business pay back that loan. So you want to leverage as much as you can, and you want to know what your assets are worth to be able to get as much of a loan as you possibly can. So, Sarah?
Yes, thank you. And we're going to go into the Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand. You can do that down below with a little hand icon. You can put a question in the chat. But before we go into that, I would just like to piggyback off of something Tammy said and give an example for funding, kind of set the table for our next call. People ask a lot, what is a good rule of thumb of what I should have as my equity injection towards a loan? I think a good rule of thumb is, if you're looking at the total investment, let's say it's $250,000, that includes the one-time franchise fee. If there is a veteran discount, it is typically off of that one-time franchise fee. That franchise fee is included in that total investment range, but that also includes the build out, the equipment, any initial inventory, travel to go to training, and the first quarter's worth of insurance and some other operating expenses. But for the $250,000 total investment, you should be comfortable with a minimum of 20% or $50,000 as your equity injection. The rest can be financed. What a lot of people do is that they will pay the franchise fee out of their own funds, whether that's from a home equity line of credit loan, cash, from a retirement account. There's a lot of different ways to get the equity injection, but you pay that, and a lender will view that as your equity injection towards that total investment. So a lot of people ask about that. Sometimes a franchisor will list more cash than the 20% of the total investment, but they may be looking at a 10 to 30% and looking at the low and the high end of the range to have a conservative amount of liquid or cash on hand. So bear that in mind. If you're concerned about funding or you think it might be tight, I think it's never too early to think about it and to get a handle on funding. Okay. So, what questions do people have about step 5, talking to the franchisor? Tammy, bravo. You and I have done a good job. No one has any questions.
Sarah, there was a question in the chat from Alvi, and it said, with the recession that is coming, how will that affect the franchises? For example, will it be more difficult to get a loan, or what about if you had to do a build out for real estate? Would that become more problematic? Kind of a broad question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think it depends on the industry and the type of business. I would love to tell all of you that the interest rates are great, but they're not. Do I think that they may come down over time in the year? Maybe. But for some people, they don't like that and they want to self-fund because they don't want the debt service and they just don't want the higher interest rates. To Tammy's point, most people want to leverage other people's money. As far as the economic climate goes, most of the industries or businesses that you're probably looking at do have some recession resistant characteristics. Certain things are going to be less recession proof than others. If you're looking at something, health and beauty, is that as recession resistant as senior care or maintenance or some other necessary service? Of course not. It's just not. But here's the good thing. One, you're going to be able to talk to franchisees and the franchisor to be like, how do you weather COVID? What happened to your business during COVID? That's a pretty good example of some uncertainty and volatility. If you're looking at a very mature franchise, you probably will get some data on how did they do during the recession in 2008? What happened? How did the business do? I know, for example, in senior care, that weathered COVID quite well, and did pretty well. Now, on commercial real estate, I think that really is dependent on what market you're in. Do I think there are good real estate deals to be had out of COVID? I actually very much do. But I think it really is dependent on the industry and what town you're in and a lot of other factors. But the good news is that you'll be able to talk to people to kind of gauge that for yourself. I hope that helped.
Yes, Sarah, he said that was great. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And I think Nathan had his hand raised. Nathan, did you have a question?
Yes. I guess I know you guys touched on it a little bit, but is there like a typical, like, I guess I just don't want to be, I don't know how to phrase this question, but you talk about selling or getting out of the franchise, right? I guess when I hear that, I also think of a timeshare. Is a franchise on the same lines of trying to get out of a timeshare contract?
No. No. This is, and the reason I say no is because in theory, you're building this business as a appreciable asset. Meaning that, hey, you're building something that has a value to it. A timeshare is more, you have a tiny slice of, capacity of this thing. Now, you could argue you're the local owner of a nationwide franchise, and does that have kind of similarity? Yeah, I would grant you that, Nathan. But this truly is a business. It's an asset that you're hopefully appreciating just like your home, which appreciates in value. And I will tell you, we don't do a ton of resales. And the reason we don't is they don't last very long. When a resale comes up, I had a couple looking at 2 resales in Fort Worth, and within a week, they were both sold. One was bought by a neighboring franchisee, and the other one was bought, by just a candidate looking for a resale business. So I would say the resale truly is a big part of the value of it, Nathan. But, don't take my word for it. Validate that for yourself.
Right. I guess so. I mean, you're always paying this franchise fee, right? Whatever their 5, 6, 7, 8%. You're always going to pay that.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. So, I mean, I guess I'm not understanding. You're building a business, but it's really not your business, even though you got some money in it.
Let me answer it this way. So, let's say you're paying a 5% royalty and a 1% ad fund. So you're paying 6% right off the gross to the franchisor. What are you getting for that? As part of your due diligence, you're going to figure out what are you getting. In some cases, you're getting access to their call center to make appointments, their national and super regional marketing programs. They are setting up the supply chain that you're, basically getting to take advantage of. Hopefully it's a volume leverage supply chain on products, et cetera. And that they're keeping up, maybe they have national or regional relationships. So as part of your due diligence, you're going to figure out, what would I pay to a vendor or an employee for that 6%? Typically, the answer is I pay a heck of a lot more, if I had to do those things on my own. So think of that almost like as an extension of your team, or of your local business. It's just the franchisor that hopefully is a subject matter expert and has a lot of experience in it.
Right. So, I mean, so is that like a monthly, like,
Typically it is monthly.
So that's what I'm saying. So you're saying roughly don't pay yourself for at least 6 months and try to navigate that pathway with whatever internally, right? If you can afford that. But that's what I'm saying. So you got to pay your loan, right?
Yeah.
You got to pay now then this monthly 6, 7, whatever the fees are. I guess, are they there to help you? Like, how do you know you're going to make that? You know what I'm saying? Like, to even break even. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, because they should give you information, whether it's in their item 19, in their earnings claim, with a workbook and an exercise to review what the drivers and the unit economics and validation. And I will tell you, Nathan, and I think you're asking all the right questions. If you started a business from scratch, the failure rate on a business from scratch and taking any kind of money out of it in the first couple years is pretty hard. So I'm not saying that you can't pay yourself in the first 6 months. I'm just saying that's what I have done, because I don't want to cut everything so tightly. I want to make sure that I have a stable profitability. But yes, you should do the math. And that's why you don't make a final decision until the very end. Meaning you should be able to get the data and do the math before you sign on the dotted line.
right.
And Nathan, if I could piggyback on that real quick, and then Sarah, we do have a question from BL as well.
Okay.
But Nathan, we partner. There are hundreds and hundreds of franchises out there, and yes, some of them are not very financially stable. But guess what? They're not going to last very long.
Yeah.
Most of these franchises that we partner with are very stable. They've been around a long time. And I will tell you that the total of your franchise fee, paying the loan back, your fixed costs, those are portions of your revenue, but they certainly are not the majority of your revenue, because otherwise franchises would not stay in business. There is plenty of revenue to pay those fees because they're the cost of doing business, right? And you're paying them to the franchisor so they can continue to build their brand and support you through marketing. Because if they didn't support you through marketing, you'd be paying your own marketing, like Sarah said, with starting your own business. So don't let the fee tail wag the business dog. They're minuscule compared to the revenue you should be earning, or these businesses wouldn't be a business. And we partner with some franchises that are umbrellas and family of businesses. So they have multiple franchises under their purview. that have been there for a long time. So what you need to do, like Sarah mentioned, is do your due diligence and make sure you get in with a franchise that has some longevity, some good cash flow, good financial support, and good franchisee support, and you will be successful. The biggest part of the reason franchises fail is not because of the franchise fee, it's because they're bad operators. And they really need to learn how to manage their business better. So it all plays into it, but don't let that fear keep you from going forward.
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess I think the biggest thing that is just bounced around in my head is being stuck in something, and then I get bored with it, and I'm in a contract. You know what I'm saying? And I guess that's
But Nathan, here's
yeah.
the thing. You can sell it before the end. And I'll be honest, they don't want you to close, not just because the franchisor is good people. Let's hope they are, but because it's not good business. They want you to sell it. You know, if you're like, hey, I want to do something else,
right.
ideally, what should happen is that if you do bore easily, that you can run it a little more passively, you know, like you're clicking on all cylinders, and then you can do something else.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
and here's the other thing, franchisors, I'll be honest, I have been the business development person for many, many franchise systems. They typically lose money on you in the first couple years, you know, meaning you would think with the franchise fee and, you know, some of the royalties, but no, they have, to Tammy's point, you know, a system of support, you know, they're running, you know, part of what you're going to do in your due diligence is what is the ratio of people supporting the franchise system to the number of franchisees? You know, are they set up for long-term growth? Are they going to explode and then not be able to support me? The good ones would never do that. You know, they would constantly hire and have the support to be able to support you in year 1 and in year 5 and in year 10, you know, as long as you're a franchisee. But yes, there's a lot of people that like your don't let the fee tail wag the business dog. I'm using that, Tammy. That was a good review. Indeed. But yes, all good questions, Nathan. And you know, down the road, do some franchises have a like waterfall royalty? Absolutely. Some want to reward strong performers, and they will have a step down. So the better you do, the less of a percentage you pay. Some franchises will have a flat royalty. I love that. A flat royalty is easy to budget. And then I know when I do well and I'm in the top quarter, I'm going to pay less as a percentage, you know. So I would say, you know, in franchising, you know, the thing of you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, even in year 5, 6, and beyond, you know, what you're paying for is that they're keeping up with the Joneses in the industry. They know what the competition is doing. They're taking AI into account. You know, they are maintaining all these things to be able to allow you to grow in a disciplined way. So for some of you,
thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. And for some of you, I'll be honest, franchising may frustrate you. And for all of us, is franchising frustrating periodically as an owner? Sure. But overall, I never would have been able to grow as quickly as without a franchise. You know, most of you are exceptionally smart people. I'm going to say all of you are very smart people. Could you figure out how to run this business? Sure, you could. But how much time and money would you spend figuring it out? Those that do well in franchising see it for what it is, which is a running head start. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm going to piggyback on Tammy's point, I always recommend to my clients, when you do validation, ask to speak to a low performer. And when they do, what they typically find is that they're just not involved. You know, maybe they're spending the minimum amount of time. They spend nothing on marketing. Maybe they recommend a minimum and they spend nothing. But, you know, get that idea, and would you do it differently? Showing up is half the battle. And if you're committed to working the systems and being present in the business, that truly is half the battle.
Thank you so much, Miss Sarah. And then you had a question from BL as well, please.
This is Billy. Yes. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Uh,
Hey, Billy.
yeah, that question pertains probably just to me. I can't find the list of the franchises that you sent me and you proposed. If you can resend that to me again, I would
Oh,
appreciate
of
it.
course. Yep. And it's in your step 4 in the portal. That's where you can see the chart. So if you log into the vetrepreneur.com, you have your own login credentials. And in step 4, you can see the full list.
Okay.
But I'm
Thank you.
happy to send.
And I think
So
that's all the questions we have, Sarah.
I think so. But I think, Nathan, you bring up a good point, which is at some point you're going to have doubts and like, what am I getting for that? And what are the, of course, that's why you have to go through the whole process to make sure you have enough data to make a go, no go decision.
Oh, I have another question.
Yes.
If you for funding, does SBA requires some money down, some equity into the business, or do they go all out?
Yes. And Billy, typically it is 20% is a good rule of thumb for your equity injection towards the total investment. I've seen as low as 10 and, as high as 30, depending on someone's financial situation and the specific business and industry. But 20% is a good rule of thumb.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. And there was a
And I'm
question
sorry,
about
Sarah, but Sherry, yeah.
there was a question, that Sherry had about how do you know who is a low performer? Well, you probably don't from reading the UpDD because it's not going to say that. You're going to have to ask the franchisor, hey, I just want to talk to someone newer or maybe someone in the bottom third just to get a good sense of, what maybe I need to do differently or better, and they'll give you that list. We'll talk about validation in much more detail in a subsequent meeting, but some ZORs do group validation where they invite a different franchisee from around the country every week, and other candidates get to ask questions. I love that because I get to hear other people's questions. And then they may do one-on-one validation, which is they'll give you a list and you can call as many as you choose. Now, once you get the disclosure document, they have a list of franchisees. You may call whomever you want. They may or may not speak with you though. And what I mean by that is that, when I was doing validation, when I owned my senior care franchise, they would send out a list of active candidates in the system. So if someone called me out of the blue and they weren't on the list, I'd be like, oh, thanks for calling me. Let me check on something. I'll get back to you. And if they weren't on the list, I would assume they were competitively shopping. So you may call whomever you like, but they may or may not speak to you if you're not at the appropriate point in the process. Okay. All excellent questions. You guys are actually right on track, if not a little bit ahead, most of you. So I say bravo to all of you. We're going to spend about, maybe 10 to 12 minutes in a breakout. Tammy's folks will go with Tammy, and the people I'm working with will get with me in a breakout room. Happy Friday, everybody. And Monday is St. Patrick's Day, so I'm wearing my green early.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Excellent job, as always.
Yes. Thanks to you too. And great questions, everybody. This whole process, the worst thing is when people don't ask any questions.
Absolutely.
So you guys should get a little box to join, and I will see you in the breakout.